Welcome to the Less Stressed Lawyer Show.
Hello and welcome back to the Less Stressed Lawyer Show with Ms. Olivia Vizachero. Olivia is a former attorney turned life and business coach for lawyers. She helps ambitious attorneys stop overthinking, set boundaries, and take bold actions so they can build a practice and a life they actually love. I'm Evan Mack, and today we're talking about why rest feels wrong for so many lawyers and how to start taking real breaks without guilt or anxiety. Ms. Olivia, welcome back, my
So
dear.
good to see you, Evan.
Good to see you too. So Olivia. So most lawyers, they know they should rest, but few actually do. Why does rest feel so uncomfortable for people in that profession?
So I think a lot of attorneys really focus on how unproductive rest is. So they think that they could be doing something more worthwhile that would give them a better ROI on their time. And they're really obsessed with this idea of maximizing efficiency and productivity. So rest feels like the opposite of that for them, even though it is actually productive. Helps us perform better. We work faster when we're rested. But I don't even like to explain that to my clients because then they'll only do it because it's the productive thing to do versus giving yourself permission to be human and accepting that rest is part of that. I also think they're really focused on not wanting to waste any time. And that's a really big fear of theirs. So one way that this happens is they think, oh, well, I'll rest when I'm done with everything, which is never going to happen. That's not the nature of our career. There's always going to be more work to do. So if you're always putting rest off until you're done with that to-do list, you're never going to get a chance to do it. But you also have to be a little more flexible with time in general and how you utilize it. We're not always striving or needing to reach that point of maximum efficiency or ROI on our time.
So, Ms. Olivia, what kind of thoughts usually come up for attorneys when they try to take time off or even slow down for a day?
So the biggest one is thinking that they can't or that they need to do something else. And I really want people to start to pay attention to their thinking to where they're able to hear that lie that I need to do this, I can't do this, because you always have an option. It might feel uncomfortable, and I think that's where people get confused. Just because you have the ability to do something doesn't mean it's going to feel really good in the moment when you do it. You might have to feel pressured and rest. You might have to feel overwhelmed and rest. And most people are expecting themselves to feel good while they're doing it instead of feeling a little bit behind the eight ball.
How does the billable hour mindset or constant availability culture make genuine rest feel impossible for them?
Those are both two huge issues when it comes to people's inability or unwillingness to rest. So, with the billable hour, most people haven't defined what enough is, what enough hours are, or what enough money is in terms of their income. So, they have this idea that more is better. And I grew up that way too. My grandfather used to have a saying, some is good, more is better. Now I really focus on more is just more. So, that might be a good thing. It might not be a good thing. It really depends, which I know is, the legal industry's favorite answer there. It depends, but it really does. What is the return on your time and what's the negative impact that you might suffer because you're constantly just striving for more billable hours? So instead of just being in the constant pursuit of more, I really encourage people, this is enough for this month. This is enough for this year. I can earn more next year through raising my rates or doing other things, but that doesn't mean that the most number of hours that I bill is the best answer here. And then as far as the 24/7 availability, I see that reinforced in so many different ways. A lot of attorneys, when they're mentoring people, they pass that down. Hey, you need to be constantly available. You need to be hyper responsive. And people, again, don't define what does that look like? What does that mean? Are there any parameters around that? And it just leads to people constantly checking their email, always answering their phone when it rings, especially if you're working on developing business. People think, oh, if I pass up a phone call, they're going to go to someone else. Okay, maybe, but what if there's enough work to go around for everyone where you're actually allowed to not answer your phone or let your answering service get it? And maybe they won't have found an attorney by the time you call them back. Maybe they will have, and you'll get another client. It'll be fine. But You've really got to get rid of that belief that I need to be on 24/7. It's physically not possible. So expecting that of yourself and then falling short of it because you're a human being who needs rest really sets you up to feel frustrated and discouraged with yourself because you're not, in your mind, measuring up to where the bar is. But the bar, if it's being available 24/7, is not possible or sustainable or attainable in any way.
Mm. What happens mentally and physically when someone ignores their need for that recovery, for too long? Kind of just ignore that.
So mentally, I think you end up starting to feel really discouraged about yourself because you do need rest. So you're constantly feeling like you're underperforming. You're going to think that if I just wake up earlier, if I just work a little bit later, if I just push harder, I could accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish. I'd be doing a better job. So you start to feel really inadequate as time goes on. Physically speaking, every time that you ignore your human, very natural need for rest and to take care of yourself in this way, you really abandon yourself. And it creates a really unhealthy relationship between you and your body because your body's going to ask you, hey, like, can we sleep a couple extra hours? Could we maybe go to bed at 10 instead of 2 in the morning? And you're like, no, I've got to tomorrow. Let me drink more caffeine. Let me, just push through a little bit more. And as you do that day after day after day, your body's like, you're not a good steward. You're not taking care of me. And this is really one of the pervasive things that leads to burnout is at eventually a certain point, your body's like, enough. You've been ignoring, I've been sounding the alarm and you've been ignoring it. So I'm going to take matters into my own hands and I'm going to start to power down. It's sort of like when our cell phones get too hot, right? Like there's an automatic mechanism within our phones that pays attention to the surroundings. And it's like, this is not good for the, you know, the inner workings of that cell phone. So it powers down to protect it. Our bodies do the same thing with burnout. So it's like, these are not ideal conditions or even okay enough conditions for you to sustain and continue on. So we're going to start to power down and conserve some energy and part of our health. And then we think something's wrong and we push harder when really that's the
Yeah.
opposite of what we need to be doing.
So how do you help clients separate resting from being unproductive since those two often get tangled? And that's kind of what you were speaking about at the beginning.
For sure. The first part is really accepting that you're a human. And I know that sounds so easy to understand. Like, of course, Olivia, we're all human beings." I'm like, "No, do you know what that means? That means that you have certain requirements in order to sustain your life. And people aren't going to go to the extreme where they're never sleeping because that's not possible. But the goal for a lot of overworkers is let me dial that down to be the least amount of hours spent resting as possible. And then everything else can be devoted to work or doing other things. A lot of people have that work hard, play hard mentality. And even that could be
Yep.
problematic if you're really pushing it too hard. So you have to accept that, the lowest number possible to sustain life isn't necessarily the goal here. I remember when I had to come to terms with this of like, ooh, we hear, I'll sleep when I'm dead or money never sleeps. All of those mantras cause this issue and really get us in an antagonistic relationship with sleeping and rest. So you have to rework those concepts. You have to come to terms with the fact that can you sustain yourself on 5 hours of sleep over the course of the next 10 years? Maybe. Or you
Should you?
could come to terms with the fact that you function a lot better with 8 or 9 or 7.5. And when people are listening to this, I want them to check in with themselves. What happens in their body when they hear me say that? If you like tense up and cringe when I say 8 hours of sleep, that's a number one signal right there that we need to work on our relationship with rest.
So what practical ways can lawyers build small rest habits into their routines without feeling like they're losing momentum?
So the thing that sounds counterintuitive or very uncomfortable and maybe inefficient for people is to actually start expanding your capacity to feel bored because people don't know how to sit still. They're constantly used to doing things or taking in information. That obsession, like I mentioned earlier, with being productive, like, oh, if I'm driving, I need to listen to a podcast or an audiobook, or let me call a client while I'm in the car so I can bill while I'm commuting to work. It's okay to not maximize the use of every single moment. So learning how to be bored, 5-10 minute intervals can really help with this. I also think it's important to differentiate a bit between rest and sleeping. So
Right.
resting is just being at rest, but it doesn't necessarily mean being asleep. So that might look like what a lot of people call a cat nap, which might just be laying down on your sofa for 15 minutes with your eyes closed. You don't actually fall asleep, but you're kind of giving your brain a chance to recharge. Or driving in complete silence. That's one of the things that I do a lot now since I've worked on my relationship with rest and expanding my capacity to feel bored. And it's very restorative. People always think that I'm crazy when I tell them that I don't listen to music when I drive or listen to a podcast, but it really gives me a chance to basically like clear out my mental inbox. And then starting to define enough. What is enough work? Not measuring that by what you get done in a given week or the number of things left on your to-do list, but really having some constraint around, hey, I'm going to work 45 hours this week and I'm going to let that be enough. Again, if someone's listening to this and they just said 45 hours, what are you talking about? It's got to be 80. Then you want to start to explore this. Who taught you that? Where did that come from? I used to really think that that was such a flex, that the 80, 90-hour work week was so impressive. And then I did it for years and it ended up being unsustainable for me. So when I talk to people about defining enough work now, there is no right answer. We normally have some influence for maybe how our mentors have worked, of what we think normal is or what impressive enough is. But you'd be surprised if you make really good use of 40 hours a week, you can get a ton done and not have to work the 80 hours to maybe still bill close to the same amount of time.
So let's kind of talk about what happens when you implement that, though. What tends to change once someone learns to rest without guilt? How does that affect, their focus, their patience, their creativity, and, getting things done?
So there's so much more creative and creativity is so important in the legal industry. I've actually been helping a friend of mine with a legal matter. You can take the girl out of the courtroom, but apparently you can't take the courtroom out of the girl as of late. And being able to think creatively and put together nuanced arguments, all of that stuff requires you being rested. I remember when I was truly like sleep deprived, completely exhausted because I was in the habit of pulling all-nighters several times a week, waking up very early, like 2 in the morning in order to start working. I'd go to bed at like 10 and wake up at 2. And everything would take me longer. It's like Leonardo DiCaprio in The Wolf of Wall Street when he's on the Quaaludes and he's moving in slow motion. That's how it feels.
Yeah.
Like typing on your keyboard is hard. Or I would fall asleep literally while typing an email. Like you'd be so tired and
Wow.
your head would just drift and you're not productive. You're not making good use of that time. So what should take 3 minutes takes 30. And it's hard to see when you're in it, but when you're out of it, once you become rested, you're really able to pay attention to how much faster you're able to work or how how much better you're able to put arguments and strategies for your clients. So that's a huge reason to do it, but also you just feel better. And I really want to give people permission to let that be enough. Will you be less reactive? Absolutely. Will you be more productive? You sure will. Will you be able to focus more and be less irritable? For sure. But you'll also just feel better. It feels good to feel rested. Give yourself permission to feel that way.
Mm. Can you share an example of a client who finally allowed themselves to rest and what that shift made possible for them afterwards, and how do things change for them?
They really were able to begin enjoying their work so much more. So I started with one client who was just so attached to maximizing her productivity and efficiency. And she really was unable to enjoy any moment outside of work. Time with family felt like it was robbing from her work. Time resting or on vacation felt very unproductive. She never went on a vacation where she wasn't working because she wasn't comfortable with not being on, not performing. And we really had to work on her embracing her humanity, that there are a lot of dynamic parts to one individual and work gets to be a part of it, but it's not the main part or the whole part. It's just a part. And as we started to do that, and we dialed down her perfectionism and we started to rework a lot of her expectations of herself, she's able to enjoy every other part of her life more and also enjoy her work more because she doesn't always feel like she's not doing a good enough job just because she's not always working. So she just reached out to me recently and reported spending several weeks in Europe with her husband. Uh, in the fall, which was so exciting to hear. I have talked to her about the time she gets to spend with her kids, which she enjoys much more because she's able to be fully there and present rather than her mind being somewhere else and her body filled with guilt because she's not somewhere else doing more work. So all this stuff changes and she resents her work less because she's able to enjoy all of these dynamic aspects of her life, work being just a part of that.
Mm. So, for a lawyer listening who feels anxious anytime they're not working, what's one simple way they can practice resting today that won't send them straight back into that guilt mode?
It's really challenging their idea of what enough is and what they're supposed to be doing. So ask yourself, how much is enough work for you? And where did you get that idea? The thing that I always like to focus on is whoever taught you the idea of enough that you're operating from, do you want your life to look like theirs? Do you want their version of success? Do you want their version of practicing law? Do you want their version of how they live their life outside of work? So, if the person that taught you that you need to be working 70 hours a week in order to be doing a good enough job or to be successful, do they spend enough time with their kids? Do they take care of their health in the way that you want to take care of their health, your health? Do they have the relationships in their lives that you want in yours? If they do, then you can keep your definition if it works for you. But normally, when I check in with people, their answer is no. They don't want a life to look like that of the person who taught them how much they need to be on. So once you start to break up the concrete around your attachment to that outdated idea of what enough work is, you can start to question that for yourself and come up with your own definition. And you don't have to make a drastic shift right away. Just start to work it down little by little. If you're typically working 60 hours a week, really work to cap it at like 58 this week, and then 57 the next week, and then 55 the week after that. And you'll start to get a little bit of your life back and see how that feels. Normally, it's just too unsustainable for people to go from working those crazy, crazy hours, like 80 hours a week, to get down to 40 because your idea of what you can get done in a week is so drastically different from what you would get done in a week if you worked significantly less. So just inch your way there and see how it feels and see if you enjoy feeling like a well-rested human. My guess is that you will.
Well, from laser. Liz Olivia, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Evan.
Right. That's it for today's episode of the Less Stressed Lawyer Show. If you're ready to stop overthinking and start making bold moves in your life and your practice, visit oliviavizachero.com. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to like, subscribe to the show, leave a review if you found this episode helpful. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.